Today you will hear the testimony of Imran Khalid, a former Muslim leader from the Persian Gulf whose voice shaped destinies for decades, until the day destiny turned against him. While his daughter, Layla, fought for her life during a flood in the United States, Imran faced the cruelest silence of all: God's silence. At the edge of despair, something impossible happened. And interestingly, the first crack in his world did not come from a temple, but from the internet. Videos by Charlie Kirk, direct conversations about truth, freedom, and Jesus, began to stir questions he had sworn never to ask. What followed feels like a scene from a movie. A presence in the night, an improbable promise, a rescue that defies logic, and a choice that costs everything. If you think you've seen it all, wait until the very last minute. And to begin, make sure you are subscribed, leave a like, and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from, because what happens next will challenge your faith.
I remember well who I was before everything collapsed. My name is Imran Khalid, and for more than 30 years I was considered a pillar of faith in the Persian Gulf, the Imam who spoke with authority, who guided crowds, who condemned error, and defended the purity of belief like a soldier of the unseen. My life was meticulously divided into schedules and obligations. The sunrise found me on my knees, noon saw me teaching, and sunset brought me back to the corridors of the temple, where I delivered long and firm sermons. Every word that came out of my mouth carried the weight of someone who believed he possessed the absolute truth. My voice echoed in mosques and on radio programs. The faithful called me the guardian of orthodoxy. I was proud of that. I was seen as an example of discipline, conviction, and unquestionable obedience. The Quran was not only my book, it was my oxygen. I spent entire nights memorizing passages, interpreting verses, correcting young people who dared to think differently. And above all, I rejected anything that smelled of Christianity. The cross, to me, was a symbol of heresy. I saw it as the final distortion of faith, a threat that needed to be fought with sharp words and flawless reasoning. When I climbed into the pulpit and declared that Jesus was only a prophet, I felt I was fulfilling a sacred duty. I believed I was protecting the people from a dangerous error. My sermons were fiery, full of gestures, comparisons, and warnings. I knew how to quote every theological argument to prove why Christianity was wrong. I took pride in dismantling any debate that approached the idea of a God who became man. I called it logical blasphemy. And yet deep down, there was an emptiness I never admitted, a silence that repeated prayers could not fill, but I masked it with zeal. When my wife died young, that emptiness grew. The pain that came with the loss was immense, but my response was to harden. I promised myself that emotion would never weaken me. I turned mourning into rigidity. Everything human left in me was focused on one person, my daughter, Layla. She became my reason to continue, my link to the world outside the temple walls. Layla was the living memory of the woman I had lost. She had the same gentle smile, the same eyes that seemed to understand everything without needing words. When she earned a scholarship to study environmental engineering in the United States, in Austin, it felt as if part of me had gone with her. I was proud of her achievement, but I feared what the Western world might do to her. So I watched from a distance. I called her every day, asked if she had done her prayers, if she was fasting at the right times, if she was staying away from Christian influences. Layla always answered sweetly, even when I was harsh. "Yes, Father. It's all right, Father." Sometimes I felt guilty for imposing so much, but I quickly silenced the feeling. In my mind, I was a guardian, and duty came before emotion. My office was the portrait of order. Books stacked with precision, prayer rugs aligned, a calendar marking each fasting phase, every religious date. I lived to teach and to correct. When a young man from the community came to me in crisis, I reminded him that doubt was spiritual weakness. I did not realize that little by little, pride had replaced faith. It was more important to appear holy than to be human. more important to be right than to be at peace. I remember one night when Layla told me, laughing, that a group of friends had invited her to a university event called Faith and Freedom, presented by an American named Charlie Kirk. Just hearing the name irritated me. Those lectures are traps, my daughter. They use beautiful words to confuse young Muslims. Stay away from that. She promised she would not go. And in fact, she assured me she had only walked past the place without attending. In that moment, I felt relieved. I still believed I could control everything, even her thoughts. But the truth is that behind my unshakable appearance, there were cracks. I was beginning to grow weary of the repetitions, the lifeless doctrinal discussions, the feeling that the more I spoke, the less I felt. My heart was dry, but I called it spiritual maturity. And when people praised me for my unshakable faith, I smiled and thanked them, not realizing that it was vanity disguised as devotion. Absolutely nothing prepared me for the day the phone rang and the world collapsed. It was June, the desert heat mixed with the anxiety in my chest. I was reviewing notes for a sermon when the cell phone vibrated. Her name appeared on the screen. Layla, my light. I answered with the same protective tone as always, but this time her voice was trembling. Father, it's raining too much. The campus is flooding. The police told us to go upstairs. I heard noises, people screaming, the sound of sirens in the background. Before I could say anything, the call dropped. I tried to call back. No signal. Again. I opened news sites, international channels, called colleagues at the embassy. They all repeated the same phrase: Texas is under a state of emergency. The images on television were unreal. Entire cities submerged. Cars swept away by the current. Helicopters rescuing people from rooftops. And suddenly, the reporter showed aerial images of a university surrounded by water. It was Layla's campus. My body froze. I, the man who had so many times comforted grieving families, had become the desperate father who no longer knew what to say. I remember dropping the remote control, kneeling in the living room, and realizing something terrible. I no longer knew how to pray. The words I had repeated all my life felt empty. My mind searched for the memorized verses, but my mouth could not find them. It was the first time I felt true fear, not the fear of death, but the fear of losing the meaning of everything. The rain beat against the windows, the wind howled, and inside me there was a scream I could not contain. I walked through the house like a madman, looking for something that made sense. A book, a sign, anything. I grabbed my old copy of the Quran, opened it at random, but the letters seemed scrambled. Then I sat on the floor and cried. I did not cry as an imam, nor as a man of faith. I cried as a father. It was in that moment that something inside me broke. I looked up at the ceiling, my voice trembling, and whispered a sentence I never thought I would say. If there is someone beyond what I know, please save my daughter, even if it means I must meet the one I have denied all my life. The words came out on their own as if they were not mine. And the moment I spoke them, I felt a different kind of silence, not the cold silence from before, but something dense, almost tangible. My muscles relaxed, my heartbeat slowed, and exhaustion overcame me. I fell asleep there, on the prayer rug, not realizing that it would be the last time I would sleep as the man I once was. The rest of that night is a blur in my memory. I only remember a strange sensation, as if the air had become lighter, a flash of light crossing the window, and before fully opening my eyes, an unexplainable certainty filled me. Something was about to happen. I do not know how long I slept, or how long I remained kneeling before I passed out. I only know that when I woke up, nothing would ever be the same again, and it was there between pain and silence that the story truly began. I remember that night exactly. It was as if time had stopped. The entire house was wrapped in a heavy silence, the kind that seems to carry something supernatural in the air. Outside, the sound of the rain still fell with fury, but inside my room there was a strange calm, dense, almost alive. I was lying on the prayer rug, exhausted, my face still wet from the tears that had dried without me noticing. I remember feeling my body numb, as if every muscle had given up fighting. My mind drifted between sleep and wakefulness, and somewhere between the two, it happened. A light passed through the window. At first I thought it was lightning, but there was no sound, no thunder. The light remained, white, gentle, not blinding. I opened my eyes, and my heart began to race. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But then I saw clearly. There was someone standing at the door. It was not a shadow, nor a blurry silhouette. It was a real presence. The man was dressed in a white robe, simple, like those worn on holy days, but the fabric seemed to emit light on its own. No gold, no ornaments, and yet everything about him felt sacred. The air around him vibrated. There was no fear, but a deep reverence took hold of me, something I had never felt, not even in my most intense moments of prayer. My lips trembled. I wanted to speak, but no sound came out. I just looked at him, and then I saw his eyes. I cannot describe them fairly. They were deep, alive, and within them was an impossible mixture of strength and tenderness. It was as if they could see me entirely, not the respected imam, not the man of reputation, but the naked, flawed, broken, tired human being. Those eyes pierced through me, and for the first time I felt completely known. He took a step forward. The light around him seemed to move with him, as if the room itself was breathing in his presence. And then, with a voice that did not seem to come from outside, but from within me, he said, "You called me, and I came. Your daughter will live, but now it is your soul that must be saved." Those words hit me like a wave. I heard them, but at the same time I felt each one vibrating in my chest. There was no judgment, no reproach, only absolute certainty. The voice was firm, yet it carried something I had never encountered in my religion: love. A love so pure that it completely disarmed me. For a moment, time stopped. I wanted to respond, to ask who he was, but the answer was already within me before I could form the question. I knew. Without anyone saying the name, I knew who was standing before me. I do not know if I closed my eyes or if he simply disappeared. The light slowly faded, and the room became just a room again. The window still half open, the distant sound of rain, and the echo of his words repeating inside me. Your daughter will live, but now it is your soul that must be saved. I sat there motionless, for long minutes, maybe hours. My body trembled. I was fully awake, but I could not comprehend what I had just witnessed. Was it a dream? The delirium of a desperate father? I pinched myself, touched the cold floor, took a deep breath. I was awake. The feeling was so real that even the air felt different. I looked around. Everything looked the same, but nothing was the same. Something inside me had been torn out, or perhaps revealed. I felt a strange weight in my chest, not of fear, but of something I could not name. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes, and at the same time a new world had opened before me. I stood up, staggering. I went to the mirror. The face reflected there was not the same. There was weariness, yes, but there was also something else. A subtle glow, a look I did not recognize. I touched my own face, trying to understand. I, the man who had spent decades teaching about God, had just encountered him in a way I never thought possible. I tried to rationalize. I searched for explanations. Perhaps it was a dream induced by exhaustion, by stress, by pain. But the more I tried to explain it, the more I realized it did not fit within logic. The air in the room still carried a gentle fragrance, unlike anything I had ever known. And no matter how hard I tried to push the memory away, his voice remained alive within me, clear, steady, impossible to deny. I stayed awake until sunrise, sitting on the floor, my heart beating in a rhythm I did not recognize. I did not know what would come next, but something in me knew that life as I knew it had ended. When the first light of dawn passed through the curtains, the sound of the phone shattered the silence. The ring echoed through the room like thunder. I grabbed the phone with trembling hands, a number from the United States. I answered without thinking. On the other end, a woman's voice, breathless, joyful, with an American accent. "Mr. Khalid, this is Sarah, the coordinator of a volunteer rescue team from a local church. Are you Layla's father?" My body froze. "Yes, I am. What happened? Did you find her?" She took a deep breath and answered, with an emotion I can still remember, as if it were now. "We found her, sir. Your daughter is alive." For a moment I could not respond. Her words seemed to float in the air. "Alive?" "Yes. Weak, dehydrated, but conscious. She was trapped with a group of students in a flooded room. We managed to reach them last night with the help of church volunteers. They formed a human chain to pull each student out. It was a miracle, sir." The tears came back uncontrollably. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. Sarah continued, "There's something you might want to know. Before she fainted, your daughter held the hand of one of the young men in the group and said something that left everyone silent." There was a small pause, and then she finished. "She said, 'Jesus was with me. He held me.'" I broke down. The phone slipped from my hands, and I fell to my knees on the living room floor. A deep, convulsive cry took hold of me. I was not crying only from relief, but from something greater, a mixture of awe, reverence, and love. Because I knew what it meant. His words, the vision, the promise, everything fit together. My daughter's voice was the echo of the voice that had visited me that night. It was not coincidence. It could not be. It was an answer. I cried as I had never cried before. My sobs blended with the distant sound of the rain fading outside. That prayer rug, where I had so often repeated empty phrases, now became the altar of my collapse, and paradoxically, the cradle of something new. Hours later, when I managed to compose myself, I turned on the television. The news confirmed it. The death toll was rising, but rescue teams spoke of unexplainable cases of survival. Helicopters showed scenes of people being pulled from the water by improvised human chains. And among the images, a group of young people hugged, soaked, smiling. I did not know who was who, but I was certain she was among them. I picked up the phone again. There was a voice message. Trembling, I pressed play. It was Layla. Her voice was weak but steady. "Father, I saw him. I know it sounds crazy, but I saw him. He was in the water. He reached out his hand and told me that you prayed and that he came to find me." Her words struck me like lightning. I closed my eyes, and the scene formed on its own in my mind. Her, surrounded by the current, and that same white light enveloping everything, the same gaze I had seen, the same voice, the same promise. For a moment, I thought my heart would stop. My body trembled with emotion. The tears returned, now silent. I looked up at the ceiling, unable to say a word, only whispering to myself, "Endim." As the sun rose and filled the room with light, I realized it was the first dawn in many years when I did not find myself in spiritual darkness. It was not joy. It was something deeper, a peace unknown, powerful and gentle at the same time. I spent the rest of the day in silence. I could not eat, sleep, or speak to anyone. I just kept reliving every second of that night, every detail of the vision, every syllable spoken by him. The feeling of divine presence was still alive within me, like a flame impossible to extinguish. But deep down, I knew that this was only the beginning. Something inside me was about to change forever. I did not yet understand what would come next, but there was no longer any doubt. The God I had always denied had answered me, and now absolutely nothing would ever be the same. After that dawn, when I heard my daughter's voice saying she had seen the one who had visited me, nothing seemed to make sense anymore. I tried to follow my routine, to pretend everything was under control, but inside me there was a silent earthquake. I returned to the mosque, climbed the same steps, wore the same robe, held the same microphone before the community that saw me as a man of unshakable faith. People greeted me with reverence, expecting my words to be as firm as they had always been. But when I opened my mouth, I realized something had changed forever. The sentences that once flowed easily now sounded hollow, distant. The words I once used to teach suddenly seemed to lose their strength, as if the air itself no longer cooperated. I repeated memorized verses, but my heart did not follow. While the crowd said, "Amen," my mind saw my daughter's face being pulled from the water and the light of that dawn piercing through me once again. I felt my whole body tremble inside, a mixture of guilt and curiosity. I no longer knew what I believed in, and that confusion terrified me. Returning home after the prayers was the hardest moment. The silence of the night surrounded me, and inevitably I heard that voice again saying, "Your daughter will live, but now it is your soul that must be saved." I tried to push the memory away, but it followed me. I kept asking myself, how could someone I had denied all my life respond to me with such love? I began to sleep very little. The little I slept was disturbed by dreams. Sometimes I saw water covering everything. Sometimes I saw that light entering through the windows, and I woke up with my heart racing. It was during one of those sleepless nights that my curiosity overcame me. I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and typed something I never thought I would search for. Who is Jesus, really? The screen showed dozens of videos, testimonies and debates. Most I ignored, but one caught my attention. It was an interview with a man named Charlie Kirk. The title said, "The Freedom the World Cannot Give." I clicked without thinking. His voice was firm, clear, rational, and different from anything I had ever heard about Christians. There were no shouts, no accusations, no arrogance. He spoke about faith, but also about reason, about truth, but with tenderness. He spoke of Jesus as someone real, close, not as a distant figure from an ancient book. I was mesmerized. He said something that never left my mind. True freedom is not found in the absence of rules, but in the presence of truth. And that truth has a name: Jesus Christ. Those words entered me like blades. I paused the video and just stared at the screen. I felt a tightening in my chest, a mix of restlessness and attraction. I, who had always taken pride in being the master of knowledge, was being undone by a video on the internet. The next day, I promised myself I would not watch anything else. But that night I gave in again. I opened another video, then another and another. I watched him speaking at universities, answering students' questions calmly, fearlessly. He spoke of Jesus as the truth that sets you free, and something within me resonated. It was as if he put into words everything I could not express. For the first time, someone spoke of Christ without hatred, without imposition, with logic and love. It completely disarmed me. I began to watch in secret, night after night, like a hidden addiction. With every new video, a piece of my old conviction dissolved. I still tried to pray in the old way, but the words sounded strange, as if they had lost the address of the one they were meant for. With every whispered Allahu Akbar, the echo of the phrase, "Your soul must be saved," came back stronger. It reached a point where I could no longer hide it. My colleagues at the mosque began to notice my silence. They said I looked tired, that I no longer preached with the same fire. I told them I was just exhausted. But deep down, I knew that what burned inside me was not fatigue. It was transformation. Meanwhile, the news about Layla came as balm. She was recovering well. She sent messages, photos, smiles, but every message carried a new serenity, something different. Even her tone of voice seemed changed. One day she sent a short voice message, almost a whisper. "Father, I saw him. I know it sounds crazy, but he was there. He said that you prayed, and that he came to find me." Her voice trembled, but there was a conviction in it that I could not ignore. It broke me. I knew she would not lie, and even if she tried, what I had experienced that night confirmed every word. I wanted to deny it, but there was no longer room for doubt. Time passed, and the restlessness grew. My reputation as an imam began to corrode from the inside out. The sermons became fewer, the visits to families rare, and I began to isolate myself. During the day, I still tried to maintain the image of a devout leader. At night, I became a man in crisis, a hidden seeker. Weeks turned into months. With each passing day, the distance between the man I appeared to be and the man I truly was grew wider, until the day came when I received a message from Layla asking me to come see her. She wrote, "Father, I need to show you something, but come in silence. No one can know." It was as if an invisible chain had broken. I knew I could not delay any longer. I traveled in secret. No friends, no colleagues, no one knew. Only her. I took a night flight with discreet connections, my heart racing, my mind in turmoil. At the airport, I was afraid of being recognized. I wore a cap and dark glasses, as if I were hiding not only my face but my past itself. When I finally set foot on American soil, the air felt different, lighter, more real. I took a cab that brought me to a small town near Austin. There, a simple house awaited me. It had a modest garden and a cross hanging on the door. I hesitated before knocking. When the door opened, I saw her, Layla, alive, smiling, with eyes full of peace. She ran to me and hugged me tightly, a hug that dissolved all the years of rigidity. We cried together for a long time. I was no longer the leader or the teacher. I was just a father meeting his daughter, and somehow finding himself again. During that first night we talked until dawn. She told me every detail of what she had lived through in the waters, of how his presence had filled everything. I listened in silence, trying to take it all in. There was no more skepticism, only emotion. In the following days, we stayed in that house. Time seemed suspended. We prayed together, not as Muslims, but as father and daughter crying out for truth. For the first time, there were no formulas, no rituals, only honest words. One night, Layla took a Bible and placed it on the table. I hesitated but sat beside her. She also brought the Quran, and we began to read side by side, not as opponents but as explorers of the same mystery. As I read the Gospels, something inside me burned. The words of Jesus did not come as a threat, but as a balm. I saw myself reflected in them, the man who had judged, who had been proud, who had lived enslaved by fear. Each passage seemed to gently dismantle me. It was as if he was speaking to me again, this time through the pages. When I read the words, "I came to set the captives free," it felt as though the entire world had stopped. On the last day of that week, Layla looked at me with tearful eyes and said, "Father, Jesus not only saved me from the waters, he wants to save you from fear." That sentence pierced the air and struck the center of my chest. I tried to hold back the tears but couldn't. My body weakened, and in a low voice I confessed, "I've been watching videos about him. I know he's real." She smiled, not in surprise, but in confirmation, as if she already knew. That night there were no rituals, no ceremonies, only surrender. I closed my eyes and for the first time spoke to him without masks. I didn't ask for anything. I only gave thanks. It was there, in that simple house between tears and smiles, that my soul finally found rest. But the rest didn't last. A few days later, when I tried to contact old colleagues in the Gulf, I realized something was wrong. The responses were cold, distant. One of them told me in a harsh voice, "People are saying you've been corrupted, that you've turned your back on your faith, that you're under Western influence." I hung up and stayed silent. The news was spreading. Rumors were growing. Emails stopped being answered. Invitations to conferences disappeared. Within days, I realized my old life was ending. The threats began in anonymous messages. "Traitor! Disgrace! You've shamed your people." And I knew that if I went back, my life would be in danger. I looked at Layla and understood what I had to do. I could choose between safety and truth, between returning to the comfort of the old world or remaining in the uncertainty of freedom. I chose truth. I chose to stay. With the help of people from the local church, we began a new chapter. We didn't know what it would look like, but we knew we weren't alone. And so I left behind the man the world knew and began to discover, step by step, the man God had seen all along. Adapting to the new life wasn't easy. Layla and I started from zero, literally. A new city, new neighbors, a new routine, and hardest of all, a new way of seeing the world. With the help of local Christians, we rented a small apartment with 2 bedrooms and a modest living room, but to me, that space was worth more than any palace I had ever lived in. For the first time in decades, I could breathe without fear. The people from the church who welcomed us were nothing like what I expected. There were no interrogations, no judgments, no impositions. Only silent acts of kindness, baskets of food left at the door, invitations for simple lunches, sincere hugs. That disarmed me more than any theological debate ever could. I began to understand that true love is not preached only with words, but lived through actions. Over time, I found ways to start over. I began working with something I had always loved, words. I started translating religious texts, first Islamic, then Christian, and, without realizing it, that became a path of healing. As I compared each translation, I felt as if I were rewriting my own soul. In between, I read the gospel in silence, letting each line soak into me like water into dry soil. Layla, meanwhile, blossomed. She resumed her studies, but the light in her eyes came from somewhere else. Sometimes at night, I found her sitting on the porch with an open Bible, reading softly. I would sit beside her and just listen. That was the daughter I had tried to shape with rules, but whom God had shaped with grace. We began attending discreet study groups where other former Muslims shared their stories. Each gathering was a mix of tears and hope. I spoke little at first, but one day they asked me to share what I had experienced. I trembled, but when I began, the words flowed like a river. By the end, I saw people crying. A man said to me, "You described exactly what I felt." That's when I realized my pain had become purpose. The guilt that had haunted me began to give way to something I had never known: peace. The shame that once made me lower my eyes was replaced by gratitude. One night, while watching a video by Charlie Kirk about courage in faith, I finally understood what he meant when he said, "Following the truth is costly, but it's worth everything." Faith, I realized, wasn't about doctrines or traditions. It was about relationship. Not a system, but an encounter. I began speaking at small church gatherings. At first, there were only a few listeners. Later, dozens. I never imagined that one day I would preach about love, the man who had spent half his life preaching fear. But every time I shared my testimony, I saw something change in people's eyes, especially in parents who had lost hope. They came to me and said, "If God reached you, then there's still hope for my son." With every word, I felt the weight of my past fade away. The old Imam, the man of rules and traditions, was giving way to someone who finally understood compassion. I was no longer the leader who dictated paths, but the one who walked alongside others. And little by little, people began to say something that still moves me deeply. The man who once preached rules now preaches love.
And if this story touched your heart, stop for a moment and reflect with me. Imran Khalid did not find religion. He found relationship. A man who spent decades defending laws and doctrines discovered that the love of God is greater than any tradition, and that grace is the greatest miracle of all. Maybe today, you too are where he once was, full of questions, weary, trying to understand the reason behind everything. But know this: God is still answering. Sometimes in silence, sometimes in the midst of pain, but always with love. If this message blessed you, take a moment to make sure you're subscribed to this channel, leave your like, and turn on the notification bell, because that helps us share these stories of transformation with even more people. And I want to know who stayed with me until the end. Write in the comments, "I love Jesus." I want to see how far his love is spreading among us. And get ready, because the next video is already appearing on your screen. It's a powerful story. From judge to fugitive, the Muslim judge who sentenced Christians to death but found Jesus and had his life completely transformed. A journey of redemption that will move you and remind you that no one is beyond the reach of God's grace. Click now because the next testimony is about to begin, and you won't want to miss it.